This is the beginning of a long-awaited journey to turn an old house and an empty piece of land into a real, self-sufficient home. What makes this story interesting is that none of them actually know what they're doing. The goal sounds simple enough: renovate as much of the house as possible with their own hands. But there's one small problem. They're complete city people. Power tools, construction work, planting. All of it is new territory. The house is in the heart of the Loire Valley, known for its castles and vineyards. Etienne and Isa bought this small stone house in a village of 2,000 inhabitants. The house is currently divided into two parts. The livable section is the second part. It is currently a barn where everything still has to be done and imagined. To turn the old house into a livable space, the first major step is replacing the roof, which has clearly reached the end of its life. Wanting to bring more natural light into the space, they also add a new window where Etienne's future office will eventually take shape, a spot where he'll be able to work with daylight pouring in. The upper floor is demolished, and the entire space is stripped back to its bare structure. Demolition always looks a bit chaotic and brutal, but it's also one of the most important parts of any renovation. Once the old layers come off, the true condition of the building finally reveals itself, for better or for worse. Every step has to be done carefully. Even if the job is to tear things down, the hardest part is knowing what should stay untouched. In an old house like this, demolition is not just about breaking walls apart. It's about uncovering what's hidden underneath, understanding how the building was made, and making sure no serious damage is done along the way. The final step is removing all the old terracotta floor tiles, one by one. They will likely be reused upstairs later, instead of being thrown away. Even after being lifted from the floor, they become a small link between what the house was before and what it is slowly turning into. There's a door here that leads out to an exterior staircase. At first glance, nothing seems unusual about it, but there's a clear issue. When it closes, it fits far too tightly. And once insulation and plasterboard are added, the wall will shift inward just enough to make things worse. At that point, the door simply won't open anymore. So the decision is made early on. The opening has to be moved to the left, getting as close as possible to the tough stone chimney. The tough stone is a soft limestone typical of the region. It comes from ancient marine sediments, which makes it easy to cut and shape, even with simple tools. That's part of the reason it's been used so widely across historic buildings in the Loire Valley, even though it's more fragile than harder stone. Moments like this are pretty common in old stone buildings, where nothing is ever perfectly straight, and every stone has to be adjusted by hand to make things fit properly. For the lintel, a 10-centimeter thick beam is used, chosen specifically for its strength. It has to carry a significant amount of weight once everything above it is rebuilt, so there's no room for approximation here. The upper floor used to be nothing more than an attic, never meant to be a living space. There are uneven levels across the floor, nothing lines up properly, everything feels slightly off. The goal here is to bring all the joists back to the exact same level so the floor can finally become flat and stable again. To reduce squeaking and footstep noise as much as possible, Etienne installs a resilient strip along all the joists before the floor goes down. It's a small detail, but one that makes a real difference once the space becomes livable. Next comes the insulation. To improve soundproofing between floors, cellulose wadding is spread across the entire surface. Before installing it, the material is loosened up using a mixer so it becomes lighter and more even. He places it by hand between the joists. It's messy work, but effective. Cellulose insulation is often used in renovation projects like this because it offers good thermal and acoustic performance while also being made from recycled materials. But before sealing everything with OSB for good, they decide to leave something behind inside the floor, a small time capsule. Nothing elaborate, just a simple jar filled with handwritten notes and a few small objects meant for whoever might one day open the floor again years from now. Installing the hangers turns out to be far more complicated than it looks. These small metal brackets have to be fixed directly onto the rafters, and later they will hold the metal furring channels that create the entire structure for the future ceiling. For the insulation, they choose wood fiber panels because of their excellent thermal lag. During summer, this helps keep the upstairs rooms cooler for longer, while in winter it helps retain heat inside and reduces the need for constant heating. Unlike synthetic insulation, it also allows the building to breathe more naturally, which is especially important in old stone houses where managing humidity becomes part of preserving the structure itself. Now that the upper floor is finally finished, attention can shift to the ground floor. The next big project is the living room, which is about to go through a complete renovation. Before starting demolition, one important detail has to be handled first: dust. To keep it from spreading through the house, risers are installed on the staircase to seal everything off as much as possible. When people are living in the house at the same time as the construction work, managing dust quickly becomes essential. Work begins by removing the old wall render to expose the original stone underneath. Besides giving the room far more character, it also reveals how the wall was originally built, so it becomes easier to determine the right position for the future lintel. Temporary supports are then installed to secure the beams above. This step requires real precision. Too loose, and the structure isn't properly supported; too tight, and there's a risk of slightly lifting the upper floor and causing cracks elsewhere in the house. In just one day, the original opening is transformed, and the two rooms feel connected. Once both lintels are installed, one crucial step still remains: tightly packing the joints with a lime and sand mixture. The material has to be compacted properly to ensure the load is fully supported. Even a slight gap could allow the upper floor to settle by a few millimeters over time, more than enough for cracks to start appearing later on. The main reason for creating this opening is to bring much more natural light into the living room, but also to make daily life easier by improving access to the garden and the cars without having to walk all the way around the house. In older houses especially, spaces were often designed for a very different way of living, so even a single opening like this can reshape the way the entire house is used. Etienne collects all the tough stones from the earlier demolition and sorts them out, keeping the best ones aside for reuse. Then, he prepares a lime and sand mortar, the kind that really belongs in old stone houses like this. It stays breathable, it stays flexible, and it lets the walls move and live a little instead of locking everything rigid. It's not the fastest way to build, but it's the one that makes sense for a house like this, working with the materials, respecting how it was originally built, and making sure it will stand solid for many years to come. Construction continues in the barn, where the next step is preparing the ground for the concrete slab. And as it often goes on a renovation site, things don't stay under control for long. In one careless moment, a shovel hits the water supply pipe, but instead of treating it only as a setback, it also becomes a chance to rethink things. A new idea comes in, rerouting the piping properly this time, in a way that actually makes more sense for the future layout. Then, Etienne spreads sand across the floor, slowly refining the level and fixing the small height differences that are still there. After that, he lays out a polyethylene sheet across the entire surface. It works as a moisture barrier, blocking any rising damp from coming up through the ground. At this point, it doesn't look like much, but it's one of those hidden steps that really matters later, protecting the slab and insulation from moisture that would otherwise become a long-term problem. Without proper floor insulation, the cold from the ground would constantly rise into the living space, and the room would stay uncomfortable no matter how much it's heated. Welded steel mesh is then laid out across the entire surface, covering the floor from edge to edge. Once the concrete is poured, it all comes together. The floor becomes far stronger, more stable, and ready to last for decades. The most urgent task is to close off the barn to protect the water heater from the cold winter nights. At the same time, a large puddle of concrete has formed at the entrance and needs to be cleared out. On construction sites, unexpected logistical problems require immediate improvisation. They quickly realize that the lower rows of stone are in very poor condition. It's a common issue in this region, especially in older houses built with tough stone. When the stone sits directly against the soil, it slowly absorbs moisture over the years, and since tuff is quite soft and friable, it eventually starts to break down after a few decades. Etienne and Issa decide to rebuild the base of the wall in slate instead. Slate doesn't absorb moisture, which makes it far more durable when it's in direct contact with the ground. To keep the wall structurally sound, the stones are always laid in a staggered pattern from one row to the next. If the joints line up vertically, it creates what's known as a saber joint, and that's something to avoid because it weakens the whole structure over time. The chimney is covered with an old render that has aged very poorly, so it's ground back to reveal what's underneath. While working on it, they discover that the base of the fireplace is actually made of concrete blocks, which likely explains why the whole thing had been hidden under render in the first place, just to cover the junction. The concrete blocks are replaced with tough stone, so the same issue doesn't come back again in a few years. The back section of the fireplace is in very poor condition. A brick wall is constructed over the entire area to give it a clean, finished look. The bricks are actually cut from roof tiles, and in total, around 280 pieces are needed to cover the whole surface. Once it starts coming together, the small color variations, the natural imperfections in the clay, and that warm orange tone give the whole fireplace a unique character that really stands out. The existing flue turns out not to be the right diameter, so adapters are used to reduce it. Then, it is insulated using rock wool and protected with aluminum foil. The stove is meant to become the central feature of the living room, so it needs to have some real character. For that reason, they choose to buy it second-hand rather than new. It comes with a simple airflow control dial, along with a lever that rotates a plate at the bottom of the stove. Simple but effective. The decision is made to dig a new well. A dowser identifies the best spot and how deep they should dig to reach water again. The technique is fairly simple. You push a manual auger into the ground while rotating it. Remove the soil as you go and repeat the process. To start the well story, we need to go back a few years when the couple was still watering the garden using the existing well on the property. But as the summer went on, the water level kept dropping. The well then eventually runs completely dry. The old well only goes down to about 3.5 meters. The new one, though, is dug much deeper, down to 6 meters to make sure they're properly reaching the water vein and not risking another dry summer. They have an 800 square meter plot of land, so at first it's almost by default that the chicken coop is placed here, simply to make everything else fit within the limited space. But the plans change when their neighbor offers to sell an additional parcel of land. Suddenly, the property is twice as large and the whole layout is completely reconsidered. With the extra space, the chicken coop is moved to a more suitable spot, giving much more flexibility for all the other projects as well. Now, the first major task is digging a 60-meter trench to bring both water and electricity to the future vegetable garden area. In a setup with a greenhouse, easy access to water changes everything and makes the entire garden much easier to manage over time. By the end of the work, 3 water access points and 2 electrical access points are installed across the space, creating a much more practical setup for all the projects that will follow. Hay ends up becoming one of the best things they use in the garden. Once spread on the soil, it keeps the moisture trapped in the ground much longer, which means far less watering during the summer. It also helps stop weeds from growing by blocking sunlight from reaching the seeds underneath. And during hot days, the soil stays cooler instead of drying out and baking in the sun. Work resumes on the ceiling. Etienne installs a membrane across the entire roof structure to act as a vapor barrier and prevent moisture from getting into the insulation. But almost immediately, things become frustrating. The double-sided tape meant to hold the membrane in place turns out to be useless, and the whole thing keeps peeling away from the framing again and again. So, instead of wasting time fighting with it, he changes strategy. The drywall is installed progressively, section by section, so the membrane stays firmly in place as the work moves forward. In renovation work, it's often not about sticking to the original plan. It's about adapting on the spot and finding solutions as problems appear. And this is just one of those moments. Little adjustments like this end up making the whole process work. When the sloped ceilings are being plasterboarded, an opening is left for access to the dormer windows, but at this stage it's still rough and not very precise. So the first step is to cut a proper frame to the correct dimensions. Then, the vapor barrier is installed and the space is filled with insulation. Once the drywall is fitted, the both dormer window areas are finally properly enclosed, now insulated and neatly covered. Next comes the gable wall. The main challenge here is the chimney flue, which takes up a lot of valuable space in the room. To recover some of that lost volume, a recessed niche is created right next to it. Instead of leaving it as dead space, the idea is to turn it into something useful, a small control hub for the TV. Behind it, a small technical hub is planned where all the sockets and HDMI cables can be centralized. After installing the metal profiles for the future partition walls, Etienne moves on to finishing the walls. The plastering begins, preparing everything for paint. All the joints are sealed with tape, and plaster is carefully applied across the entire surface, especially over the screw heads and any damaged areas. The first step in wall partitioning is all about getting the layout exactly right. The future rooms are mapped out in advance, where the living spaces, utility areas, and technical rooms will all sit. Once that's confirmed, the structure starts to take shape. Vertical studs and horizontal tracks are fixed to the floor and ceiling, forming the skeleton of the new walls. From there, the space slowly starts to divide, and the house begins to take its new form. But this is also where things get a bit tricky. Nothing in an old house is ever perfectly straight. Where the new walls meet sloped ceilings or existing beams, small irregularities start to appear, and every fix has to be adjusted on the spot. One wrong alignment here doesn't just look bad, it can throw off the entire wall system later on. After building the toilet and finishing the tiling, the next step is preparing the walls for painting. It starts with filling the larger holes using matte plaster. At this stage, it's important not to overdo it. The material is kept slightly recessed, so there's no excess thickness. Otherwise, it all has to be sanded back later, and that quickly becomes a real hassle. The goal during sanding is to lightly smooth the center of the joints just enough to remove imperfections while paying extra attention to the edges so the transition completely disappears into the wall. After each pass, the dust has to be wiped away using a microfiber cloth. It's a repetitive process, but it's what gives the surface a clean, even finish before painting. Etienne and Isa decide not to install any additional flooring over the OSB and keep it as the finished floor. The choice is mainly driven by budget, especially with current parquet prices making a full floor covering hard to justify. But of course, the OSB can't just be left as it is. The process starts by filling all the screw holes and joints between the panels with wood filler. Once everything is dry, the surface is sanded down, then finished with 2 coats of varnish. It protects the floor, smooths it out visually, and most importantly, makes it easy to clean with a simple mop. After installing the toilet, the next step is building a sink vanity using a welded rebar structure and OSB countertop on it. Etienne takes care of finishing the surrounding space, and the space slowly starts to look like a proper bathroom, with everything coming together piece by piece. With the kitchenette in place, the upper floor slowly takes its final shape and becomes a proper, usable studio. What used to be an unfinished attic space is now fully functional for everyday living. The concrete slab on the ground floor is first treated with a moisture-blocking primer, then a self-leveling compound is poured to get a perfectly even surface. Once it dries, an underlayment is laid down, and the parquet flooring is installed on top. But this is also where things get delicate. If the height isn't right, the door could easily start rubbing against the new floor. But everything lines up as it should, and the door opens smoothly. This project wasn't really planned from the beginning, but pretty quickly it becomes clear that adding just one beam here is enough to install a net, so they don't hesitate for long. To fix it in place, they go with plate-mounted eye bolts that can simply be screwed directly into the wood. It works perfectly on the 3 wooden beams, but there's a problem with the plasterboard wall. It's not strong enough to take any real load. So, another solution is needed. They switch to 23-centimeter scaffold anchors, long enough to reach through the insulated plasterboard and bite into the solid, tough stone wall behind it. That's the only way to make sure everything holds properly. Once the fixings are secure, the net is finally installed. The shower area is now clearly defined, and the walls are closed up with drywall. A single solid stone slab is installed on the shower floor, acting as the base of the entire shower. It gives the space a clean, natural look, while also providing a durable surface that can handle water. Once the waterproofing is done, it's finally time to move on to tiling. The first step is planning the layout carefully. For the top and bottom rows, there's a simple rule. It's better to make the cuts at the bottom, where they're less visible, and finish the top with a full tile for a cleaner look. But in the process, one important detail gets overlooked. To form those two rows, about 20 tiles have to be cut in half, and the leftover pieces end up too small to reuse. In the end, nearly 10 tiles are lost, and an extra order is needed to finish the job. It's a good reminder that a bit more planning could have avoided the waste. Still, everything comes together in the end. The final row is completed, and the shower tiling is finished successfully, without any real setback. Building a dressing area is much more practical than buying a wardrobe. It can be adapted to the owner's needs and sized exactly to fit the space. Here, the tough stone wall is in poor condition, so a lime and sand render is applied to level it out and create a clean back wall for the dressing area. Meanwhile, the other sides are finished with plasterboards. Where the two meet, the junction looks a bit rough and visually unappealing. To clean it up, two wooden boards are assembled and fixed along the corner, giving the dressing a much more finished look. The couple decides to give new life to an old structural beam by turning it into a decorative light fixture. Instead of throwing it away or leaving it unused, they choose to keep a piece of the house's history and integrate it into the new interior. The mix of the old weathered wood and modern lighting fits perfectly with the atmosphere of the renovation, giving the space something both rustic and personal. Etienne's friend Matthew is the one building all the countertops and work surfaces for the project. Instead of buying ready-made wood, he gets trees from local people and cuts them into planks himself before turning them into furniture. It's a nice way of giving those trees a second life instead of seeing them end up as firewood. The wood used here is cedar. It naturally resists insects, barely moves over time, and smells incredible while being worked on. After building the desks for Etienne, Matthew moves downstairs, where the future workshop for Issa starts taking shape. A large U-shaped worktop is built there. Instead of buying a brand new sink basin, they recover an old metal wash basin and decide to give it a second life. Then, a solid wooden shelf is fixed onto the wall, followed by a few small decorations and everyday objects that slowly bring the space to life. It's a simple detail, but it completely changes the atmosphere of the room. Little by little, the workshop begins to feel like a real working space. They find a small vintage chest of drawers secondhand online and decide to transform it into a vanity unit. After a few modifications, it becomes fully functional while keeping all of its original character. It gives the space something much more unique than a standard store-bought piece of furniture. They build a guardrail at this location to secure the mezzanine. A frame is first created using steel profiles, giving it the necessary strength and rigidity. To keep the design visually light, cables are then run through the frame, making it open and airy. In the living room, all the structural work is finally completed. The next step is insulation, followed by plasterboard installation on all the external walls. This is what will define how comfortable the room feels later on, both in terms of temperature and acoustics. To hide the electrical cables, false ceilings are built, which will also later be used to integrate the lighting system in the living room. Where needed, junction boxes are installed with access panels, so everything can still be reached easily if maintenance is required in the future. And slowly, the house starts to feel like something much bigger than a renovation. Nothing here is rushed. Friends step in to help when needed, ideas change along the way, and problems are often solved with simple, creative solutions. New life is given to forgotten pieces, and every corner of the house carries a bit of that hands-on approach. Etienne and Issa have shaped their dream house, a real home built with time, effort, and a lot of heart, where every detail tells a part of their story. If you enjoyed watching this build come to life, there's more on the way. Subscribe to Macarium, stay tuned for the next project, and share your ideas in the comments. We might bring them to reality.